The screams of an outraged bride echoed through the grand Victorian mansion on the edge of Independence, Missouri, in the summer of 1879. Beatrice Fairchild's porcelain hands trembled as she gripped the letter her father had just delivered, the ink still fresh on the marriage contract that would sell her like cattle to the highest bidder. "You cannot be serious, father." Beatrice's emerald eyes brimmed with tears as she stared at her father across his mahogany desk. At 22 years old, she had hoped to marry for love, not financial convenience. Mr. Richardson is nearly 50 years old. Reginald Fairchild, once a proud businessman, now a desperate gambler drowning in debt, wouldn't meet his daughter's gaze. "Beatrice, please try to understand. The bank is foreclosing on everything. Richardson has agreed to settle all my debts in exchange for your hand. Your dowry from your grandmother's trust will go to him upon marriage. My inheritance was meant for my future, not to pay for your gambling habits." Beatrice's voice cracked. The substantial dowry her maternal grandmother had left in trust for her marriage had been her one security in life, to be released only when she wed. Now it would be used to save her father from ruin and sentence her to life with a man known for his cruelty toward his previous 2 wives, both deceased under questionable circumstances. "The wedding will take place in 2 weeks, her father said with finality. "Richardson has already purchased the ranch adjacent to his holdings. It will be your marital home." Beatrice fled her father's study, her elegant blue dress swishing against the polished floor as she ran to her room. Once there, she collapsed onto her bed, burying her face in her pillow to muffle the sobs that racked her body. How had it come to this? Her mother had died 5 years earlier, leaving Beatrice to manage the household while her father gradually gambled away their fortune. That night, Beatrice made her decision. Slipping from her bed in the dark hours before dawn, she dressed in her plainest dress, packed a small valise with essentials, and took the modest savings she had hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Her heart pounded as she crept down the servants' staircase and out into the cool night air. The stage coach station would open at first light. From there, she would travel west as far as her meager funds would take her. Better to face the unknown than to be sacrificed on the altar of her father's financial salvation. By noon the next day, Beatrice was jolting across the Missouri countryside in a crowded stagecoach, her future as uncertain as the dusty trail stretching before her. 3 days and several coach changes later, the exhausted young woman stepped down into the bustling frontier town of Silver Creek, Colorado Territory. The mountain air was thin and crisp, so different from the humid climate of Independence. Silver Creek had sprung up around the mining operations in the nearby mountains, and now served as a supply hub for the surrounding ranches and claims. The main street was alive with activity: cowboys leading horses, miners with weathered faces, and merchants hawking their wares. Beatrice clutched her valise tightly, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. Her funds were nearly depleted, and she knew no one in this rough-edged town. "Watch yourself, miss," a deep voice called out as a wagon nearly clipped her. Strong hands steadied her shoulders, pulling her safely to the wooden sidewalk. Beatrice looked up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a worn leather hat. "Thank you, sir," she managed, embarrassed at her inattention. The tall stranger tipped his hat. "No trouble, madam. You look a mite lost. Just arrive on the stage," Beatrice nodded, taking in his appearance. Worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing muscular forearms, and a leather vest completed his outfit. A gun belt hung at his hip. Standard attire in these parts, she was learning. "I'm Daniel Wade," he introduced himself. "Own a small spread about 5 miles outside town." "Beatrice Fairchild," she replied, then immediately regretted giving her real name. What if her father had sent telegrams looking for her? Daniel Wade noticed her expression shift. "Something wrong, Miss Fairchild?" Before she could answer, a commotion from the telegraph office caught their attention. The operator was tacking up a notice on the board outside his door. Several townspeople gathered around to read it. Daniel squinted at the paper. Seems someone's looking for a runaway lady, offering a reward too. Beatrice's heart sank. She'd been found out already. In a panic, she turned to flee, but Daniel gently caught her elbow. "That'd be you, I reckon," he said softly, not as an accusation but an observation. She froze, uncertain whether to deny it or beg for help. Her desperate eyes must have communicated her distress because Daniel glanced around cautiously, then guided her toward a quieter side street. "I'm not here to turn you in, Miss Fairchild, but you might want to explain what has a proper young lady running from a reward notice." Something in his direct gaze told Beatrice she could trust him. Taking a deep breath, she gave him the bare details: her father's debts, the arranged marriage to a man she feared, and the dowry that would be seized upon marriage. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression darkening when she described Richardson's reputation and the suspicious deaths of his previous wives. "I had to leave," she concluded. "I couldn't bear to be sold like property to save my father from his own poor choices." The cowboy was quiet for a long moment. "You got any skills, Miss Fairchild? Any way to support yourself out here? I'm educated. I can read, write, keep accounts. I'm a fair hand at cooking and household management," she replied, chin lifting slightly. "I'm willing to work hard." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Town's small. Won't take long for whoever's looking for you to track you here, especially with that notice up." "What am I to do?" Desperation tinged her voice. He adjusted his hat, looking toward the mountains. "I might have an idea, but it's mighty forward and you'd have cause to refuse. Please, Mr. Wade, any suggestion would be welcome." "Marry me," he said simply. Beatrice stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon, not for real," he clarified quickly. "Just on paper. I offer you my name, you get protection from this Richardson fellow. Once things settle, we can dissolve it quiet like if you wish." "But why would you do such a thing for a stranger?" Beatrice couldn't comprehend such generosity. Daniel's weathered face showed no deceit. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good folk have nowhere to turn. My place needs a woman's touch and I could use help with the books. In return, you get a roof, food, and safety. Nothing more required." Beatrice studied him, searching for ulterior motives but finding none. This man, this cowboy, was offering her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to turn. "What about my dowry?" she asked cautiously. "It's held in trust until I marry. It's substantial." Daniel shook his head firmly. "Keep it. I don't want or need your money, Miss Fairchild. This is about giving you a choice your father didn't." His words struck her deeply. "A choice, freedom, safety. If we're to be married, even just on paper, you should call me Beatrice," she said softly. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, transforming his rugged features. "And I'm Daniel." Or Dan, to friends. 2 hours later, they stood before the town judge in his cluttered office. Daniel had found 2 ranch hands he knew to serve as witnesses and arranged everything with surprising efficiency. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, with Beatrice wearing the same travel-worn dress she'd arrived in. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the judge declared, closing his book with a thump. "Wade, you can kiss your bride." Daniel hesitated, then leaned forward and placed the gentlest of kisses on Beatrice's cheek. The gesture, though chaste, sent an unexpected warmth through her. As they stepped out into the late afternoon sunlight, now legally bound to each other, Beatrice felt both relief and trepidation. She had escaped one marriage only to enter another, albeit one with very different terms. "We should get moving," Daniel said, helping her onto the seat of his wagon. "It's a fair ride to the ranch, and I'd like to get there before dark." As they left town, Beatrice noticed a man watching them from outside the hotel, a stranger with a city suit and calculating eyes. She turned away quickly, but not before a chill ran down her spine. The journey to Daniel's ranch passed mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the extraordinary arrangement they had just entered. The landscape gradually changed from rolling prairie to more rugged terrain, with pine trees dotting the hills and mountains rising in the distance. "There it is," Daniel finally said, pointing ahead to a modest but well-kept homestead nestled in a small valley. Wade's Rest. The main house was constructed of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, flanked by a barn and several outbuildings. A small creek ran behind the property, with a vegetable garden visible off to one side. It wasn't grand like her father's house, but something about its honest simplicity appealed to Beatrice. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Daniel looked pleased. "Been working on it for 5 years now. Started with nothing but that falling down cabin." He nodded toward a smaller structure set back from the main house. "Built the house myself, with some help from neighboring ranchers." As they approached, a young boy of about 12 ran out to meet them, followed by an older man with a pronounced limp. "You're back early, boss," the boy called. Then, seeing Beatrice, he skidded to a stop, eyes wide. "Toby, Joseph, meet Mrs. Wade," Daniel said, the words sounding strange even to his own ears. "My wife, Beatrice." The shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. Joseph, the older man, recovered first, removing his hat. "Madam," he said respectfully, "this is quite a surprise." "To all of us, I assure you," Beatrice replied with a small smile. Toby continued to stare until Joseph nudged him. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Wade," he stammered. Daniel jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Beatrice. "Joseph is my foreman," he explained. "And Toby here is our general helper, does a bit of everything." "The boy's being modest," Joseph interjected. "Joseph Miller at your service, madam. Been with Dan since he scraped together enough to buy this place, and young Toby here is my nephew. His parents passed in a fever 2 years back, so he's with me now." "I'm very pleased to meet you both," Beatrice said warmly, already feeling more at ease with these straightforward people than she had in her father's artificial social circle. Daniel took her small valise. "Joseph, we'll need to fix up the house proper for a lady. And Toby, maybe you could fetch some fresh water from the spring." As the men bustled about, Daniel showed Beatrice into the house. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a solid table, a few chairs, and a stone fireplace. Off to one side was Daniel's bedroom, and across from it, a smaller room he'd been using for storage. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but the small room can be yours once we clear it out. I'll sleep in the old cabin till we sort out proper arrangements." "You needn't displace yourself," Beatrice protested. "This arrangement is already more than generous." Daniel shook his head. "A lady needs her privacy. It's no hardship. I spent my first 2 years here in that cabin." Beatrice looked around the simple home, noting its cleanliness despite the obvious bachelor occupancy. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything." He seemed almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "You should know, there's talk of a railroad coming through these parts. If it does, land values will rise. Your father or this Richardson fellow might press harder to find you then." "All the more reason to maintain our arrangement," she replied. "At least until I can figure out a more permanent solution." That evening, after a simple meal prepared by Joseph, who, it turned out, was also the ranch's cook, Beatrice sat on the small front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Daniel joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "It's a beautiful place you have," she said, accepting the cup. He leaned against the porch post, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. "Been my dream since I was a boy. My pa worked other men's land all his life. Promised myself I'd have my own someday. And now you do, getting there. Still small compared to some spreads, but it's mine. Got 30 head of cattle, 6 good horses, and enough land for both. Making ends meet, but not much more." The honesty in his assessment was refreshing after her father's constant pretensions of wealth, even as they slid toward ruin. "What about you?" Daniel asked. "What were your dreams before all this?" Beatrice considered the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "I suppose I wanted what most young women want: a home, a family. I enjoy reading and learning. Once dreamed of being a teacher, but father said it wasn't suitable for a lady of our standing. Daniel snorted softly. Out here, we judge folks by what they can do, not who their grandparents were. I'm finding I prefer that approach, she admitted. They fell into companionable silence as darkness settled over the valley. In the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another further away. We should turn in, Daniel finally said. Morning comes early on a ranch. As promised, Daniel took his blankets to the old cabin, leaving Beatrice alone in the house that was now theoretically hers as well. That night, lying in a hastily prepared bed in what would become her room, she stared at the ceiling, wondering at the strange turn her life had taken. 1 week earlier, she had been Beatrice Fairchild, daughter of a respected businessman, destined for a loveless marriage to save her father's reputation. Now she was Beatrice Wade, wife in name only to a hardworking cowboy she barely knew, hiding from her past in the Colorado mountains. Sleep came eventually, deeper and more peaceful than any she'd experienced in months. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Beatrice rose early, determined to earn her keep. By the time Daniel came in from his morning chores, she had breakfast-ready simple fare of biscuits, eggs, and coffee, but hot and fresh. He stopped short at the sight of the table. You didn't have to do this. I want to contribute, she said firmly. I'm not here to be a burden. Over the following days, Beatrice found her place in the rhythm of ranch life. She took over the cooking, much to everyone's delight. Joseph's skills, while adequate, had definite limitations. She cleaned and organized the house, planted additional vegetables in the garden, and began keeping the ranch's accounts in order. Daniel's books had been a haphazard collection of figures jotted in the margins of an old ledger. Beatrice created a proper bookkeeping system, giving him a clearer picture of the ranch's finances than he'd ever had before. We're doing better than I thought, he admitted one evening as they reviewed her neat columns of numbers. Still tight, but not desperate. The cattle operation could expand, she suggested. Your grazing land could support twice the herd you currently have. He looked at her with newfound respect. How do you know about cattle operations? I read your agricultural journals, she replied simply. And I observed how the successful ranches around Independence were managed. Their unusual partnership began to evolve into something resembling friendship. Daniel, she discovered, was well-read despite his lack of formal education, borrowing books from the town's small library whenever he went in for supplies. Their evenings often included discussions of what they were reading or stories of his early days in the West. For his part, Daniel found himself increasingly impressed by Beatrice's resilience and determination. The genteel young woman he'd rescued from the street had quickly adapted to frontier life, facing each new challenge with grace and growing confidence. 2 weeks after her arrival, Beatrice accompanied Daniel into town for supplies. She wore her hair differently now, braided and pinned up under a practical bonnet, and had altered one of Daniel's old shirts into a serviceable blouse to pair with her skirt. The transformation was enough that she felt secure venturing into Silver Creek. Their first stop was the general store, where Daniel introduced her as his new wife. Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, immediately took her under her wing. We don't get many new ladies out here, she said warmly. You must join our sewing circle on Thursdays. While Daniel settled his account, Beatrice browsed the fabric section, mentally calculating what she could afford to purchase to make new clothes. She was so engrossed in comparing prices that she didn't notice the well-dressed man who entered until he spoke directly behind her. Well, what a fortunate coincidence. Beatrice's blood ran cold. She knew that voice Horace Richardson, her father's chosen husband for her. Slowly she turned to face him. Mr. Richardson, she acknowledged stiffly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his cold eyes. Your father is quite concerned about you, my dear, as am I. Imagine my surprise when I tracked you to this frontier establishment, only to hear you've married some local cowhand. Daniel appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. Is there a problem here? Richardson assessed Daniel with obvious disdain. No problem, just reconnecting with an old acquaintance. I'm Horace Richardson from Independence, Miss Fairchild's fiancé. That would be Mrs. Wade now, Daniel corrected, his voice level but with an edge of steel. My wife. Richardson's smile tightened. There seems to be some confusion. Beatrice and I had an arrangement approved by her father. Any subsequent entanglements would be invalid. We have a marriage certificate that says otherwise, Daniel replied. Signed and legal. Interesting. Richardson's gaze shifted back to Beatrice. Your father will be disappointed, as will his creditors. I've purchased his debts, you see. Without your dowry to settle them, he may face prison. Beatrice felt a flicker of guilt, quickly extinguished by anger. You mean without my grandmother's money to settle them, the money that was meant for my future, not his gambling debts. Nevertheless, family obligations remain. Richardson lowered his voice. I'm staying at the hotel. Come see me this evening and we can discuss a suitable arrangement. Perhaps this marriage could be annulled quietly. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Beatrice and Richardson. My wife won't be meeting you anywhere, Mr. Richardson. Any business you have can be conducted right here in the open. The tension between the two men was palpable. Richardson finally inclined his head slightly. Another time, perhaps. Good day, Mrs. Wade. I do hope you'll reconsider your position. After he left, Beatrice released a shaky breath. He found me, just as you warned. Daniel guided her to a quieter corner of the store. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands trembled. He won't give up easily. My dowry is substantial, and he's not a man accustomed to losing. He can't force you to go with him. The marriage is legal. But he can ruin my father, she said, conflicted. Not that father doesn't deserve it, but still. Daniel's jaw tightened. Your father made his choices. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to save him. Mrs. Peterson approached with concern. Everything all right, dears? That man seemed rather unpleasant. Just someone from back east, Daniel replied smoothly. Nothing to worry about. But as they finished their shopping and loaded the wagon, both knew Richardson's appearance had changed everything. Their marriage of convenience was no longer just a private arrangement, it had become their defense against a powerful enemy. The ride back to the ranch was subdued, both lost in thought about the confrontation. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I should tell you something, he said, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. I've been thinking about it since that man showed up. Beatrice turned to him, apprehensive. What is it? I wasn't entirely honest about why I offered to marry you. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. My mother was in a situation similar to yours, forced to marry a wealthy man she feared. She didn't survive the marriage. Beatrice's heart constricted. Daniel, I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. I was 10 when she died, supposedly fell down the stairs, but I knew better. My stepfather had a temper, especially when he drank. His hands tightened on the reins. When you told me about Richardson and his dead wives, I couldn't stand by and let history repeat itself. His confession touched her deeply. This wasn't just charity or kindness, it was a deeply personal mission to prevent the tragedy he'd witnessed as a child. Thank you for telling me, she said softly, and for what you did, what you're still doing. He nodded once, then changed the subject. We'll need to be careful now that Richardson knows you're here. I don't trust him to give up easily. Nor do I, she agreed. The money involved is too significant for him to walk away. When they reached the ranch, Daniel immediately informed Joseph about Richardson's presence in town. Keep an eye out for strangers, he instructed, and Toby shouldn't go to town alone for a while. That night, Beatrice had difficulty sleeping. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside had her starting awake. Eventually, she gave up and wrapped a shawl around her nightdress, padding out to the front porch for fresh air. To her surprise, Daniel was already there, rifle across his knees as he sat in a rocking chair. Couldn't sleep, he asked as she appeared. No, too much on my mind. She sat in the chair beside his. You're keeping watch, he nodded. Just being cautious. Richardson doesn't strike me as the type to dirty his own hands, but he might hire someone who would. They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them. "What will happen to the dowry?" Daniel asked eventually. "If you never return to claim it," Beatrice had been wondering the same thing. "The terms state it becomes available upon my marriage, with the funds transferred to a bank of my choosing. I would need to appear in person with my husband and marriage certificate to claim it. But Richardson can't access it without you. No, that's why he's so determined to find me. Without me, the money stays in trust indefinitely." Daniel considered this. "So even if we stay married, your father and Richardson lose access to the funds?" "Yes, unless I voluntarily claim the money and give it to them." She turned to look at him in the moonlight. "Does that change our arrangement?" "Knowing that remaining married to me blocks a significant sum from ever reaching them?" "Not one bit," he said firmly. "This was never about money for me." His sincerity was evident even in the darkness, and Beatrice felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with her shawl. The next week brought changes to their routine. Daniel rarely left Beatrice alone, taking her with him when he rode out to check the herd or repair fencing. They developed an easy rapport during these outings, with Daniel teaching her to ride properly and explaining the workings of the ranch. "You're a natural on horseback," he commented one afternoon as they rode along the creek that marked the eastern boundary of his property. "Most city ladies I've known would be complaining about the saddle by now." Beatrice laughed, patting her mount's neck. "Buttercup here is hardly a challenging ride. She's as gentle as they come. Still," he insisted, "you've taken to ranch life better than I expected." "I find I prefer it to the artifice of society," she admitted. "Here, what matters is what you can do, not who your family is or how well you can gossip." Daniel smiled at that. "We have plenty of gossip out here too. It's just about different things." "Like the mysterious marriage of Daniel Wade to a woman no one had seen before," she suggested wryly. "Exactly like that," he agreed. "Mrs. Peterson told me the sewing circle has been abuzz with speculation. Some think you're a mail-order bride I sent for secretly." Beatrice chuckled. "And what did you tell her?" "That some stories are best left private." His expression grew more serious. "Though I hate asking you to lie." "It's not entirely a lie," she pointed out. "We are legally married. The circumstances are simply unusual." As they turned back toward the ranch, Beatrice realized how comfortable she had become in Daniel's company. His straightforward nature and quiet strength were so different from the calculating social climbers of her father's circle. When he spoke, she knew she could trust his words. That evening at supper, Joseph mentioned seeing a stranger asking questions in town. "Didn't like the look of him," the foreman said. "City clothes but rough hands, asked specifically about Wade's rest and the new Mrs. Wade." Daniel exchanged a concerned glance with Beatrice. "Richardson's hired man, most likely." "Should I be worried?" Toby asked, eyes wide. "Just be alert," Daniel instructed. "No one comes on this property that we don't know without you raising the alarm." For the next several days, they operated with increased vigilance. Daniel moved his bedroll back into the main house, sleeping in the front room to be closer if trouble came. Beatrice found his presence reassuring rather than intrusive. On the 5th night after Joseph's warning, their precautions proved warranted. Beatrice woke to the sound of Rover, their ranch dog, barking furiously. Moments later, she heard Daniel moving swiftly through the front room, followed by the metallic click of his rifle being readied. Heart racing, she pulled on her robe and crept to her door. Through the crack, she could see Daniel by the window, peering out cautiously. "Someone's by the barn," he said, sensing her presence without turning. "Stay inside." Before she could protest, he slipped out the door. Beatrice moved to the window, straining to see in the moonlight. A shadowy figure darted between the barn and the corral, followed by another. Then came a shout, the sound of a scuffle and a single gunshot that shattered the night. Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. For several agonizing minutes she could see nothing, hear nothing but Rover's continued barking. Then finally, Daniel's tall figure emerged from the shadows, marching a man ahead of him at gunpoint. Joseph limped out from the direction of his cabin, shotgun in hand. Unable to contain herself any longer, Beatrice hurried outside, clutching her robe closed against the cool night air. Daniel. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he called back. This fella wasn't expecting a welcome committee. As they came closer, Beatrice could see their captive, a rough-looking man with a bloody nose and murderous eyes. "He was setting fire to the hay in the barn," Daniel explained grimly. Joseph caught him in the act. The would-be arsonist spat on the ground. "Should have burned the whole place down, that's what I was paid for." "By Richardson?" Beatrice asked, though she already knew the answer. The man glared at her but said nothing. "Joseph, ride into town at first light and bring the sheriff," Daniel instructed. "We'll keep our friend here secured until then." After the man was tied securely in the old cabin with Toby standing guard, armed with Joseph's shotgun and explicit instructions to call for help if the prisoner so much as sneezed, Daniel and Beatrice returned to the house. "He meant to burn us out," she said, her voice unsteady. "To force me back to Richardson by destroying your home." Daniel paced the small living area, still keyed up from the confrontation. Or worse, a fire at night with everyone asleep. He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. They both understood the potential tragedy that had been averted. "This has to end," Beatrice said firmly. "I can't have you and your people in danger because of me." "What are you suggesting?" Daniel stopped his pacing, studying her face. "I need to confront Richardson directly. Make it clear that I'll never agree to his terms, regardless of the consequences." She squared her shoulders. "And I need to claim my dowry legally as Mrs. Wade so it can never be used as leverage against me again." Daniel considered her words. "That would mean going to Independence, to the bank that holds the trust. Yes, with you as my legal husband." She met his eyes steadily. "If you're willing." "Of course I'm willing." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "But are you certain this is what you want?" "Once we claim the money, there's no going back to your old life." Beatrice smiled softly. "I have no desire to go back. These past weeks, despite the circumstances, have shown me a different way to live, a better way." The intensity in Daniel's gaze made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her properly this time, not the chaste peck from their wedding. Instead, he squeezed her hands and stepped back. "Then we'll go to Independence," he decided. "After the sheriff deals with our arsonist. But we'll need to be careful. Richardson is likely to follow." The sheriff arrived mid-morning, a grizzled man named Harker who took his job seriously. After hearing their account and questioning the prisoner, he agreed to hold the man on charges of attempted arson and trespassing. "Not much doubt he was hired," Sheriff Harker observed, "but proving by whom is another matter. These types rarely implicate their employers." "We have our suspicions," Daniel said, glancing at Beatrice. The sheriff nodded. "The fella at the hotel, I've had my eye on him. Something not right about the way he was asking after your wife." He tipped his hat to Beatrice. "Don't worry, Mrs. Wade, we'll sort this out." After the sheriff departed with his prisoner, Daniel and Beatrice began planning their journey to Independence. It would take nearly a week of travel each way, plus time for the banking business. "Joseph can manage things here," Daniel said as they discussed arrangements. "It's not ideal timing with calving season approaching, but it can't be helped." Beatrice felt a pang of guilt. "Your ranch shouldn't suffer because of my problems." "Our ranch," he corrected automatically, then looked almost embarrassed. "I mean, legally speaking, as my wife." "I understand," she said, though the casual way he included her in his domain sent a curious flutter through her stomach. They departed 3 days later, taking the stagecoach east. The journey was long and uncomfortable, with frequent stops to change horses and overnight stays in rustic way stations. Throughout it all, Daniel remained attentive and protective, ensuring Beatrice had the best seat available and standing guard during their stops. On the third night, at a slightly more comfortable inn than previous accommodations, they were able to secure separate rooms. After dinner in the small dining room, they lingered over coffee, discussing their plans for Independence. We'll need to be careful, Daniel warned. Your father and Richardson will have eyes watching for you. Beatrice nodded. The bank first to secure the dowry. Then perhaps a visit to my father to make it clear I've made my choice. Daniel studied her across the table. Are you nervous about seeing him again? A little, she admitted, but not afraid, not anymore. She smiled slightly. I'm not the same person who fled in the night. These past weeks have changed me, for the better, I'd say. His blue eyes were warm with approval. You've shown more courage than most men I know. His praise brought color to her cheeks. I've had an excellent example to follow. As they rose to retire to their rooms, Daniel hesitated in the hallway outside her door. Beatrice, there's something I should say before we reach independence. The serious note in his voice made her pause, key in hand. What is it? He ran a hand through his hair, uncharacteristically uncertain. Our arrangement, this marriage, it started as a way to protect you, but I want you to know if you wish to end it after the dowry is secured, I'll understand. The thought of ending their marriage struck Beatrice with unexpected force. Is that what you want? No, he said simply. But I need you to know you have the choice. She regarded him thoughtfully. This honorable man who had risked everything for a stranger, who had given her shelter and respect when she needed it most, the thought of leaving him made her heart ache in a way she hadn't anticipated. Let's see this through first, she suggested. Then we can discuss the future. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Good night, then. Good night, Daniel. Inside her room, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, examining her confused emotions. When had her feelings for Daniel shifted from gratitude to something deeper? She couldn't pinpoint the moment, but there was no denying that the prospect of ending their marriage left her feeling hollow. The revelation kept her awake long into the night. 2 days later, they arrived in Independence. The familiar streets felt strange to Beatrice now, as though she were returning to a place she'd visited in a dream. Daniel arranged rooms at a modest hotel on the outskirts of town, away from the establishments her father might frequent. Best if we're not seen until we're ready, he explained as they settled in. The First Bank of Independence opens at 9 tomorrow. We'll go first thing. That night, Beatrice lay awake, anxious about the confrontation to come. Not just with the bank, but potentially with her father and Richardson as well. The dowry was substantial enough that neither man would relinquish it easily. Morning came too quickly. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best outfit, still modest by her former standards, but neat and respectable. Daniel looked different too, having purchased a new shirt and cleaned his boots to a shine. You look very handsome, she commented as they prepared to leave. He tugged at his collar, obviously uncomfortable in the more formal attire. Feel like I'm trussed up for Sunday service, but I reckon a bank needs to see a proper businessman. You clean up nicely for a cowboy, she teased, adjusting his collar more comfortably. The casual domesticity of the moment struck them both, and their eyes met with shared awareness. Daniel cleared his throat and offered his arm. Shall we, Mrs. Wade? The First Bank of Independence was an imposing stone building on the main street. Inside, the marble floors and mahogany counters were designed to inspire confidence in the institution's stability. Beatrice approached a teller, requesting a meeting with Mr. Winters, the trust manager who had handled her grandmother's affairs. They were shown to a private office where a balding man with spectacles greeted them. Miss Fairchild, what a surprise! Your father mentioned you were traveling. It's Mrs. Wade now, she corrected, presenting Daniel. My husband. Mr. Winters' eyebrows shot up. I see. Well, congratulations. He shuffled through some papers. Your father was in recently inquiring about the trust, as was Mr. Richardson. I imagine they were, Beatrice said dryly. I'm here to execute the terms of my grandmother's trust. As you know, upon my marriage, the dowry becomes accessible to me and my husband. Indeed. Winters studied Daniel with obvious curiosity. We'll need to verify your marriage, of course. Daniel produced their certificate. All legal and proper, Mr. Winters. The banker examined the document carefully. From Colorado territory, most unexpected. He looked up at Beatrice. "Your father will be surprised. My father arranged my marriage without my consent," she said firmly. "I made my own choice instead." Winters cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, the terms are clear. The trust passes to your control upon verified marriage. I'll need to prepare the paperwork for transfer. Where would you like the funds deposited?" "Half to my husband's account at the Silver Creek Bank," Beatrice instructed, surprising Daniel with this decision. "The remainder I'd like in banker's drafts that we can carry with us." After signing numerous documents and answering questions to verify her identity, the transaction was complete. Beatrice was now in control of her inheritance, a sum that made Daniel blink when the final figure was presented. As they left the bank, documents secured inside Daniel's coat, he whispered, "You never mentioned it was that much. Does it matter?" She asked, suddenly worried that the amount might change his perception of their arrangement. "No," he said after a moment. "But I understand now why Richardson was so determined. That's more money than most men see in a lifetime." They were so engrossed in conversation that they didn't notice the carriage approaching until it stopped directly beside them. The door swung open to reveal Reginald Fairchild, Beatrice's father. "Beatrice," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Get in, please, we have much to discuss." Daniel moved protectively closer to her side. "Mrs. Wade makes her own decisions now." Reginald's gaze shifted to Daniel, taking in his frontier appearance despite the new shirt. "So you're the fortune hunter who spirited away my daughter." "Father," Beatrice interjected sharply, "Daniel is my husband and you will show him respect. If you wish to speak with us, you may invite us properly to your home." The older man's face reddened at being addressed so firmly by his daughter. After a tense moment, he inclined his head stiffly. "Very well, I invite you both to tea at 3 o'clock. We have family matters to discuss." After the carriage pulled away, Beatrice released a shaky breath. "That went better than expected. Are you sure you want to meet with him?" Daniel asked, concern evident in his expression. "Yes. I need to make a clean break, and—" She hesitated. "Despite everything, he is still my father." Daniel nodded in understanding. "Then we'll go together." At precisely 3 o'clock, they arrived at the Fairchild mansion. For Daniel, it was his first glimpse of the world Beatrice had left behind, a world of privilege and wealth evident in every ornate fixture and polished surface. The butler who answered the door barely concealed his disdain as he showed them to the drawing room, where Reginald Fairchild waited. To Beatrice's dismay, Horace Richardson was also present, standing by the fireplace with a tumbler of whiskey in hand. "Ah, the happy couple," Richardson said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "How convenient that you've returned just when the trust becomes accessible." Daniel's posture stiffened, but his voice remained calm. "Mr. Richardson, didn't expect to see you here." "Horace is still a family friend," Reginald said, gesturing for them to sit, "despite the unfortunate circumstances." "You mean despite my refusing to be sold to him?" Beatrice asked bluntly. Her father winced. "That's hardly a fair characterization. The arrangement would have benefited everyone." "Except me." Beatrice remained standing, Daniel at her side. "I came to inform you that I've executed grandmother's trust. The funds are now under my control as per the terms." Richardson set down his glass with a sharp click. "That's impossible. The trust requires a legitimate marriage." "Which we have," Daniel replied, meeting the older man's glare steadily. "All legal and recognized." Reginald's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You've married a complete stranger, a cowboy, rather than honor your family obligations." "My obligation was to myself," Beatrice countered. "To not spend my life with a man known for abusing his wives." Richardson stepped forward menacingly. "You'll regret those slanderous words, my dear." Daniel moved between them. "That's close enough." "What exactly do you hope to accomplish here?" Richardson demanded. "You've secured the money. Was that your plan all along, Wade, to find a wealthy heiress to fund your little ranch?" "The money was never my objective," Daniel said evenly. "Unlike some, I don't measure a woman's worth by her dowry." Reginald collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking older and defeated. What about my debts? The creditors will take everything. Beatrice felt a flicker of pity for her father despite his actions. I'll settle your legitimate debts, father, once. After that you must make your own way as I've had to do. And what of our arrangement? Richardson demanded. I've purchased those debts at considerable expense. Your arrangement was with my father, not with me, Beatrice replied coolly. I suggest you consider it a poor investment and move on. Richardson's face darkened with fury. This isn't over. A marriage can be annulled. Or a husband can meet with an unfortunate accident like your arsonist friend discovered. Daniel stepped forward, his patience clearly at an end. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Richardson. Should anything happen to me or my wife, the sheriff in Silver Creek has a sworn statement naming you as the man who hired an arsonist to burn our home. I suggest you consider carefully before making more enemies. A tense silence followed. Finally, Richardson retrieved his hat from a side table. Reginald, I'll leave you to your family reunion. We'll discuss our business another time. After he departed, Beatrice turned to her father. I meant what I said about settling your debts. Send the accounting to me through Mr. Winters and I'll arrange payment. And then? Her father asked, looking lost. You'll return to your ranch? Yes, she said simply. It's my home now. Reginald studied his daughter, noting the changes in her, the confidence, the strength that hadn't been there before. Are you happy, at least, with this man? Beatrice glanced at Daniel, finding his steady gaze on her. Yes, father, I am. They left the Fairchild mansion 20 minutes later, having said what needed to be said. As they walked back toward their hotel, Daniel was unusually quiet. Are you all right? Beatrice asked, concerned by his silence. Just thinking about what you said in there, he replied, about being happy. I didn't lie, she said softly. These past weeks, despite everything, have been the happiest I can remember. He stopped walking, turning to face her. Beatrice, I need to ask you something important and I want an honest answer. Her heart quickened. Of course. Our arrangement, our marriage, it started as protection, as a way to help you escape, but now… He seemed to struggle for words, unusual for the typically straightforward cowboy. Now that you have your dowry secured and Richardson warned off, you don't need my protection anymore. What are you asking, Daniel? His blue eyes held hers intently. Do you want to continue our marriage, not just on paper but real? Because I find myself wanting that very much. Beatrice's breath caught. Are you saying, I'm saying I love you, he admitted plainly. Didn't expect to, didn't plan to, but there it is. Somewhere between teaching you to ride and watching you stand up to your father today, I fell in love with the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known. Joy welled up in Beatrice's heart, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks now. His face lit with a smile that transformed his rugged features. Right there on the sidewalk of Independence, Missouri, Daniel Wade took his wife properly into his arms and kissed her for the first time, a real kiss, tender and passionate, that sealed their transformation from a marriage of convenience to one of love. They returned to Silver Creek a week later, their relationship fundamentally changed. The ranch hands noticed the difference immediately, the way Daniel's eyes followed Beatrice across a room, the casual touches they now shared, the private smiles. About time, Joseph commented dryly to Toby after observing them at dinner. Been obvious to everyone but them since about the second week. With Beatrice's dowry, they were able to expand the ranch operations significantly. Daniel purchased additional cattle, improved the breeding stock, and hired 2 more hands. Beatrice used part of the funds to build a schoolhouse on the property, offering classes 3 days a week for Toby and the children from neighboring ranches. Richardson made one more attempt at intimidation, sending a lawyer to challenge the validity of their marriage, but the effort came to nothing. The certificate was legal, the witnesses credible, and Beatrice made it abundantly clear she was exactly where she wanted to be. By the following spring, Wade's Rest had become one of the most prosperous operations in the region. The railroad did indeed come through, just as Daniel had predicted, bringing increased opportunities for cattle shipping and making their strategic location even more valuable. On their first anniversary, Daniel surprised Beatrice with a proper wedding ring to replace the simple band they'd used for their hasty ceremony. As they stood by the creek where they'd first begun to know each other, he slipped the gold band onto her finger. "I know we did things backward," he said, holding her hands in his. "Married first, fell in love after, but I wouldn't change a moment of it." "Nor would I," Beatrice replied, looking up at the man who had offered his name and asked for nothing, yet had given her everything. "From the moment you offered to help a desperate stranger, you showed me what true strength and goodness look like." "And you showed me what courage looks like," he countered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Running from everything you knew, starting over, facing down your past. You're the strongest person I know." Beatrice Wade. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, casting the valley in golden light, they sealed their renewed vows with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. 2 years later, Wade's Rest welcomed a new resident, Daniel Edward Wade Jr., a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. As Beatrice nursed their son in the rocking chair on the porch of their expanded home, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, joining her as twilight settled over their land. "How strange life's paths can be," she replied, smiling down at their sleeping infant. "If my father hadn't gambled away our fortune, if Richardson hadn't been so despicable, if I hadn't fled exactly when I did. If I hadn't been in town that exact day to see a frightened young woman nearly run over by a wagon," he finished, crouching beside the chair to gaze at their son. "Some might call it fate," Beatrice mused. Daniel shook his head. "I call it the best decision I ever made, offering my name to a woman who deserved the freedom to choose her own path. And I chose you," she said softly. "Every day I choose you again." As stars began to appear in the clear Colorado sky, the family remained on the porch a cowboy who had offered his protection without asking for anything in return, the woman who had found love where she least expected it, and their child, the living proof of a marriage that had begun as refuge and blossomed into the deepest kind of love. In the years that followed, Wade's Rest continued to thrive. Beatrice's father, true to form, gambled away the money she had provided to clear his debts and eventually moved west himself, settling in San Francisco where he found work as a bookkeeper, a humbler life, but perhaps a more honest one. Horace Richardson, after one final failed attempt to discredit Daniel through legal channels, returned to independence and eventually lost much of his fortune in bad railroad investments. Beatrice and Daniel welcomed 2 more children, a daughter, Elizabeth, and another son, James. The schoolhouse Beatrice had built became the heart of the community, eventually growing into a proper school with a hired teacher, though Beatrice continued to teach special classes in literature and mathematics. Daniel expanded the ranch operations to include not just cattle, but also horse breeding, with their stock becoming known throughout the territory for quality and temperament. The modest log house was gradually expanded and improved, though they kept the original structure at its core as a reminder of their beginnings. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sometimes sit on the porch as they had in those early days, marveling at how a marriage that began as a practical arrangement between strangers had grown into the foundation of their world. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed in Independence?" Daniel asked on one such evening as they watched a summer storm roll across the distant mountains. Beatrice shook her head. "Never. That life wasn't real, it was all appearances and expectations. This," she gestured to the ranch, their home, the life they'd built. "This is real." Daniel squeezed her hand. "A cowboy offering his name to a runaway bride. Who would have thought it would turn out this way? I'm grateful every day that you were the one who pulled me out of the path of that wagon," she replied. "My cowboy hero." He laughed at that. Just a man who recognized someone who needed help and found himself needing her just as much in the end. As night settled fully over Wade's rest, they remained hand in hand on the porch of the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the life, the family, the love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. A marriage of convenience that had become the greatest love story either could have imagined, played out against the backdrop of the wild and beautiful Colorado frontier that had brought them together.